You know, learning how to identify people playing in your face has been one of the most interesting lessons that I will say that I have learned on this healing journey that I've been on. I say that because I have seen people that I never thought or even had any inclination that they were playing in my face, able to see them for who they truly were. And once I was able to see them, it's one of those things to where, do you ignore it or do you acknowledge it and go through that fear of, okay, well, if I acknowledge it, then how is that going to change the dynamic of the relationship? And that in itself can be a deterrent for mentioning it, even though you feel at your core that it's not right and it's unjust. But as you start to develop these boundaries with individuals, you get to step into an authentic version of yourself, or you get to exist as an authentic version of yourself, or over time, as you go through these encounters, you will start caring less, I guess you would say. I mean, it's one thing to do it in the right way, but as long as you're expressing yourself authentically in regards to how other people's actions are making you feel, as long as you do it in a way that's not toxic, I don't see how you can be at fault in that, because a lot of people will continue treating you a certain way and or in essence playing in your face until you call them out, or they actually see that you can see them exactly for who they are and not the image that they're painting. So I say all that because I've had instances where it was family, it's friends, it's been I was gonna say emotional partners, but partners that you're in relationships with, people that I've trusted and valued in my life. I've started to realize that they are basically playing in my face, and to a degree I don't fault them because I allowed them to do it by not putting up or having those emotional boundaries. And I take that back to the lack of love that I had for myself. You know, when you don't have love for yourself or even know how to love yourself, the smallest morsel of love that anybody gives you, you will latch onto that because that's what your self-worth becomes ultimately. And it's only through developing that self-love that I have been able to empower myself to basically feel from a standpoint of, hey, you're not treating me a certain way. So whereas prior I wouldn't say anything, I would just bottle it up and I would just go through life doing and living up to the expectations that other had of me. No, this ends and I am going to express how your behaviors are making me feel. So part of that, especially if you're someone that hasn't done that before and you're learning how to do it, it's that typical pendulum swing to where, okay, the pendulum is all the way to the right side for you not speaking up for yourself and holding those boundaries, to where now the pendulum completely swings to the opposite side, to where now you're enforcing boundaries, but maybe you're going a little bit too hard in the paint, to where finding that equilibrium. So I just had an experience that showed me just how much I've grown and how I'm finally hitting that balance of, okay, I was not speaking up. Okay, now I'm speaking up, but maybe I'm being a little bit too much I'm being a little too fiery as far as that's concerned. So finding that balance. So over the past month, I've talked about previously about work dynamics, especially ones that I've experienced that have been on the toxic side. So I found myself leaving another team to where there was a toxic environment, to where now I'm on a different team and things were going great, going lovely as far as I was aware. So, you know, we always have our own perception of the situation versus reality. So, I mean, I hadn't received any complaints really. I was in a new role, a new environment, so I was learning. So obviously with anything new that you're learning, there is feedback that comes along with it. So that way you can grow and improve. So basically in this work dynamic, there was a new manager that came on to the team, And it seemed like ever since the new manager came on, things have taken an interesting dynamic to where the finger has been pointed quite a bit towards me as far as my performance and how I'm showing up. So, as someone that's always able to hold themselves accountable, looks internally, self reflects, I welcome the opportunity because, as I stated, I was new in the role and I had expressed desire for coaching and never received it. It was as if I was brought onto the team and then I was kind of shoved into a corner or thrown into the deep end, basically to learn how to swim. So I was doing my best to doggy paddle and to keep my head above water, which is why I was surprised and didn't have a problem with the feedback because I wanted to get better, but it was basically how it was being delivered as well as the nature. So typically with anybody that are having performance or is being claimed that they're having performance issues, there's usually a structure that's put in place that the person has to go through in order to either show that they are improving and that they are capable of doing the job, or they're unable to meet the metrics and they can't meet the expectations of the job. So then maybe we should look at moving on from them, whether it's releasing them, finding a different position within the company for them to ascertain or for them to step into. So for the past few months, viewpoints had been expressed as far as my performance, but they were all emotional based. It was all emotions based. And one of the initial questions that really showed me how much I had been changing and looking at things, I was just like, okay, yes, this doesn't feel good in the moment, but the things that are being expressed about me as far as how I'm showing up, I'm a human being just like this other person is a human being. So two human beings that maybe don't see eye to eye, or someone is perceiving the other human being as having a shortcoming or not being able to live up to their expectations, typically you would think you would sit down and have a conversation with that person. And so those dynamics weren't happening. Basically, it was just going behind my back, not talking to me, talking to my leaderships, to where it put them in a state to where now they feel like they have to respond while being mindful of the relationships that they have nurtured and they fostered over the years. So I found myself in a situation after multiple months of being in this whirlwind to where I'm constantly evaluated, I'm constantly critiqued, I'm constantly being talked about from a standpoint of not performing, but not giving any guardrails as far as how to perform and what does it look like to be successful, to make it through it. And so I ultimately, once I recognized that, the question was, am I going to keep that to myself, or am I going to express this situation that is unfair, that I would equate it to emotional hazing? You know, am I going to have self-respect for myself to bring it up, especially when I'm asked? Or am I going to keep my mouth closed and bottle it up and keep pushing forward because I am someone that can persevere or has persevered through many of challenges, and just seeing it as, well, this is another challenge that I have to persevere through versus this is a challenge that's ripe for me to speak my mind, especially whenever things aren't done fairly to me or I don't feel like I'm being treated fairly. And that's what I did. And it was interesting that once I voiced my feelings and my concerns with this process, how the emotional dynamic changed to where the leader that I was speaking to, they admitted that there aren't any guardrails. They've tried repeatedly to ask, what does success look like that we're measuring Brandon against that he needs to meet in order to get out of this dynamic? And nobody could tell him what it was. So even he as a leader saw the unfair advantage of what I was being put through and required to perform against. So anybody that's constantly being evaluated with no guardrails as far as what success looks like can bring a lot of stress and anxiety, because at the end of the day, how do you know that you're being successful versus how do you know you're not just being put in emotional situations where you potentially could react and self-sabotage to where, say, individuals want to get rid of you, but you really are performing your job well, better than most people. and they can't find anything to really hang their hat on. So their only hope is to keep sending you energetic attacks at you, keep putting you in situations where you would respond from emotions versus from a state of logic or a state of groundedness. And I realized that that's what's going on. And it was as if me calling it out and just simply asking, what does success look like? The fact that they couldn't even answer, what does success look like, puts them in a position to where now I'm no longer feeling on the defensive, like I have to defend Brandon, I have to prove who I truly am. But because I am Brandon that has done so much work on himself, because I am sovereign, I am someone who holds myself accountable, I now see what it is that you're doing, and I'm calling it out because it is unfair. And I do recognize that there are multiple avenues that I can take to get relief in this situation. But out of respect, I'm coming to you all and asking you all, what does success look like? So that way we can get on the same page and stop continuing in this emotional cycle. And I tell you what, when I said that and I mentioned that it was a huge emotional relief, and the funny thing was is I'm big on angel numbers and big on my awareness. And as I was having this conversation and I was having that dynamic, something pulled my attention to my left, and where I sit for my office, there's a window that looks out down onto the street into this alleyway that goes between two businesses. And there's a lot of cars that always go up. So one of the big things that I like to do is look at license plates. So especially if I feel drawn to them. And as we were having this discussion, there was a white car that drove up the alleyway, and on the back of the license plate, it said 5558. So I'm not going to go into the dynamics, so more than welcome to look it up. But once I looked it up, kind of saw the correlation between the two, those are the types of things that I look at from spirit, that I'm on the right path whenever things in my reality show up, especially as I'm going through a period of transition or stepping out of my comfort zone to really express myself, especially when it comes to boundaries. So I would invite you to look at, what things are happening in your life where people are playing in your face and you feel that pull inside of yourself that something isn't right, but you're choosing to make yourself small because maintaining that relationship is more important in your life than being your authentic self. Because the way I see this entire dynamic, every person that's involved in this situation is more concerned with maintaining the relationships that they've fostered over the years versus really caring about my safety, my mental well-being, and my health, because they value those relationships over me. And when you're in a work dynamic, it's about, sometimes somebody has to be the bad guy and they have to put those pants on. And if people refuse to do that, you don't have to be the bad guy, but you still do have to enforce your boundaries. And I only got to that point because I got tired of people pushing my boundaries and going through the heartache, going through the heartbreak, crying all those tears and stuff, till finally I got to the point where I said no more. And like I said, I started that pendulum shift to enforcing those boundaries, to where, yes, I tapped into that fire energy a little bit too much, and then I had to learn that balance of recognizing when things are unfair. And then when I recognize they're unfair, sitting with myself and trying to figure out, why do I feel like it's unfair? And then being honest with myself in that moment, if I'm messing up and I'm contributing to it, owning that and stepping into that. Okay, so now that I recognize that I'm self-sabotaging, what steps can I do to reverse that? And then through that, once these situations come up, you will no longer be self-sabotaging because you will be standing in your sovereignty. And then that's when you can have those true conversations with those parties that's making you feel that way, that's treating you a certain way. And you can have that from a position of empowerment, expressing how you feel and your expectations and what you want. Just like in this instance, me simply asking, what does success look like? And the fact that the leaders who are putting me through this can't even define what success looks like, what does that tell you? Is it fair for Brandon to keep dwelling in these situations when even the leaders that are subjecting me to this can't even define what success looks like? So now that creates totally different conversations that didn't exist before, that had not and wouldn't exist had I not stepped into my power, I had not recognized it, I hadn't done the emotional work on myself to recognize that, hey, this isn't a fair situation. At least it appears to be, so let me have the conversations from a non-emotionally minded perspective, so that way I can get to the root of it. Once you get to the root of it, then you can make the educated decisions and the steps from that standpoint. Whether it's confronting and speaking your emotions and feelings to that person that you really don't want to lose that relationship with, but the newer version of you that refuses to allow yourself to be treated a way that you know don't feel good, or you don't walk away from that experience. So if anything, I invite you just to take a look in your life. What are those situations? What are those instances that you've wanted to speak your truth, but you've been afraid of doing it because you valued that relationship more than you valued yourself? And I encourage you to sit with yourself, ask yourself, why are you valuing this person over yourself? And what steps can you take to correct things so that way you value yourself and your emotional feelings to not allow anyone to no longer play in your face. So I love you, family. I'll leave you with this. I'm trying to make shorter videos, but I just feel called to share with what I share, because I know that somewhere in my ramblings and some of the things that I say, there will be nuggets here and there that will help different people. So, but I do want to work on, and that's part of something I'm working on, is how to say something and shorten it so that way it still has the same impact without feeling like I have to ramble on, because that's another part of myself that I'm working on, is because I feel like people don't get me sometimes. And even though they say they get me, I feel like this unconscious need to keep explaining things, because it's almost like, okay, I hear you say you get me, but do you really get me? So let me just keep talking a little bit more until I feel confident within myself that you really do get me and you really do hear me. So part of this is a learning experience on my behalf as well. So, I ask you all for grace and in this moment as I'm learning and growing along with you. So, and that's why I always say I'm not here to tell anybody how to be in life. I'm just showing you how I'm going through and learning to integrate the lessons as I go along, because none of us are perfect. We're learning each and every day, and this is what this school of life is all about. So I love you, family. I love you, family. I love you so much, and I hope you have a great day.